On this episode of ITAV, we talk about hacking AV systems, what integrators need to know and where they can learn it, and threat, risk, and vulnerabilities of AV systems. All that and more. Next on the ITAV show.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is the ITAV show, episode 21, recorded Friday, August 31st, 2018. Risk it.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Kramer, AV Beyond the Box.
This is the ITAV show, the monthly look at how the IT industry and the AV industry intersect. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to talk about all things IT, AV, and this month's security, first and foremost, his name is Bill Natras, and he works for BIAMP. Welcome, sir.
Good to be here.
Also with us is my buddy and pal, and he works at a he's an end user now. He used to be a manufacturer, though. His name is Bradford Ben. Welcome, sir.
Good to be here. Nice to be seen. I like the fact that you have the setup, but you need to watch the windows a little. I see a little bit of streaking there.
That we have people for that. So
okay. No, we don't. I pay your bills.
You just need to pay them. All right. First and foremost, the one story that we're probably going to spend the most time on today was a story in Wired about DEF CON. And real quickly, what DEF CON is. DEF CON is a conference of hackers, by hackers and for hackers. Most of them are white hat. I'm certain that there are some bad actors in amongst the crowd, but most of them are white hat hackers. This young man put together a presentation on how to hack conference rooms and hotel rooms. And the system he chose to do this with was a Crestron system. The Crestron system he had discovered had an exploit in it. Crestron actually was made aware of the exploit back in March or April, and they released a firmware in May to kind of close off the exploit. Regardless, this exploit was there. This system that he had had not been updated yet, so he was able to do the presentation. But the one piece I want to kind of start with on this for both of you, because Bill works for a manufacturer now, but he used to be a consultant. Bradford used to be a manufacturer now, but now he's an end user, which is kind of weird. Is one piece of the article, and Bill, we'll start with you on this because you're the manufacturer now. He said that one of the things that Crestron offered integrators and offered folks was authentication. However, it wasn't turned on by default. And I think that was one of the pieces that really kind of stood out to me as an area that we could probably have a conversation and talk to not just Crestron, but other manufacturers as well. So the first question to you, Bill, is what can manufacturers do to kind of help integrators make sure that these systems are a little bit more secure?
Well, we always start with the education discussion, but why don't we just go over that? Get educated. Okay, great. Moving on from that, we got to remember, and I'm not going to speak for any one individual manufacturer or anything like that. It's just across the board. You either have products that are pre-configured as they come out of the factory, or you got products that are bricks. I mean, they are the most elegant boat anchors you can think of, and we package them in really nice boxes with foam around them so that they get protected, but they do nothing when you get them. And what the manufacturer has to do is balance between how many technical support phone calls am I going to get because I can't figure out how to do something versus I pull the box out of the box, I plug it into the system, and I can start sending something through it. Whether it's audio, video control, it doesn't matter. Is it possible that a authentication mandate could be put into products? Most definitely. And I think where some of this is evolving now is that the AV industry is just starting to, and the manufacturers within, is just starting to acknowledge what 802.1x is and understand that 802.1x is not a security, but it's a part of a security solution. Okay. I'm authenticating that device onto the network at the port level. I know what that device is. It is allowed to be on this network. The AV space is just learning how to deploy this, and we're not experts at it, but we've got some expert network security tools there to be able to leverage. And now manufacturers can start to leverage things like defaulting things to an on state for security and things like that. We are not going to stop the hacking thing. I mean, when I first read this article about, what came out from DEF CON here this year, you do a search and you realize that, companies the products in the AV space have been getting hacked for years. And this is nothing new. And, back to the educate discussion, if you are not actively updating firmware within your customers' products, the systems that you've deployed, you definitely have a fault in your mitigation plan for risk. So
okay. I'm going to disagree with you. And this is why Tim has us both on. So couple things. I agree with you. It's not new. In July of 2014, I think it was, a hotel in Shanghai, China, run by Crestron, was also borked or owned or pawned or whatever you want to call it, because it was all on one network with limited security. Easy enough to get in, control thermostats, control TV channels, etc. Same basic idea of what you could do by getting into this Crestron unit. It's not a new problem, to your point. AMX has had problems. Crestron's had problems. I'm willing to bet you every company that uses a computer of some type has problems. It's just the nature of the beast. What I will say is I agree with Bill of what happens when it comes out of the box. If you send a device that is set as configured for security and someone goes out there to just load a file and they don't know how to authenticate it and get it into 802.11x or Active Directory or Radius server or pick your authentication protocol, it's a nice boat anchor. So it's that fine line. So I understand why they said it with authentication turned off. The other thing I think that's interesting is the update firmware. And Tim saying that a security update is not a firmware update is 100% wrong, Tim, because you are updating the firmware to be more secure. It is a firmware update.
Okay, but hang on for a second, because this is something about terminology, right? And actually,
well, no, I'm not done ranting about updating firmware yet.
No, hang on for a second, because terminology is important. This is a conversation Bill and I actually had right before we started recording. In the IT space, if you tell someone this is a firmware update, what does it mean? And if you tell someone this is a security update, that means it's a completely separate thing to the IT department. Am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay. I would disagree with you. Every IT professional I know says a security update is a security update. It's indicating that you're closing back doors, you're eliminating risk, you're eliminating the security holes that are there. And a firmware update is updating features and functions of that box.
To some degree, I agree with you.
Okay.
However, it's typically a security patch and not an update. And the reason is they're patching the holes.
Okay,
so
again, back to terminology though, right?
We're back to terminology, but the other thing is, and I haven't looked at Crestron stuff, but I do know from my previous employers, some of our stuff, is we wouldn't release an update that was just a security fix. It was a security fix plus other features, typically. Yes, there were the emergency patches, but oftentimes the two went hand in hand. So the two are not mutually exclusive. And sometimes doing an update to get the new security is a bigger risk than doing proper network security and not doing the update. It sounds odd, but as an end user, I'm going to tell you, I am designing my systems to not be connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form ever. And my hope is once it's running, we don't fix it again. And that includes not updating it, whether it be firmware or software fixes or security patches, because system's running. It's a closed system, not connected to the outside world. I want the system to keep running. And that's typical for most large venues. I'm not going to say all, but if you have a football stadium with 90,000 people in it, odds of you updating the firmware and re-vetting the entire system before a football game, unless you're the Bears, you really don't want to annoy your fans. So that's kind of why I'm saying it's a different model. I agree if you're a business conference room that is connected to the internet, that needs to be security updates. But saying that security updates and firmware is not the same thing is somewhat of a misnomer, because whether they admit it or not, there are changes being made to the operating system that may break your system. And that's why I don't agree with your approach, Tim, of going out and doing the update, especially if the system's not connected to the network.
And I don't disagree with you if it's not connected to the network. I will disagree with you, though, because so many of these manufacturers are putting features and functionality that require the internet. Right now,
that's
yes,
a whole nother problem.
But it's not a whole other problem. But it's if you want this feature, right? If you want remote management, if you want usage reporting, you have to have some sort of network connectivity. If you don't, that's fine. And I don't disagree with you that if the system is completely off the network, like there is nothing plugged into the RJ45, then sure, you don't have to update it, because then the risk, it's an air gap security, right?
Right.
But if it is, then you need to.
Well, let's be careful here, because you and I did it as well. It might be plugged into the network. It's not plugged into the World Wide Web internet.
See, I would disagree with you then, because
there's a difference is because of the level of security that would be put forth of its own network that's not connected to the internet, that has an on-premises usage server, that has this and that. That is a different solution than being connected to the internet. Now, you have the exact same problem of, yes, someone can get in, but you have to physically be on property at that point. And also, my answer is, as soon as you get physical access to a device, all network security goes out the window. It's just, you want to, I'll use Bill's products as an example, not picking on Bill or his products, because BiAmp makes great things. But Bill, if I had physical access to a BiAmp box, would I be able to compromise it?
It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you have access to any device, you can compromise it.
Exactly. It could be something as simple as disconnecting the power cord. It now no longer functions.
Right.
So
what might be better here is, because, from the consulting side of things, put that hat on for a minute. Sensitivity to what's going on is all a function of design and what the solution needs to be. And Tim, this is what you and I were talking about before. Let's back up and let's define three terms, because these three terms are very critical to understanding what all this is and how it applies to the AV professional, the IT professional, the end user, et cetera. Those three terms are threat, risk, and vulnerability.
Yep.
And they are three terms that are very often misinterpreted when you're putting things together. Threat is anything out there that can happen that you don't want to have happen. Risk is the actual things that can occur, whether it be by a threat or other technology challenge that might take things down. And vulnerability is how thin is the ice that I'm walking on. Okay? And if you keep those three things in mind, because a vulnerability is how a risk can negatively impact your system, a threat is how that risk can hit the vulnerability. So understanding those three terms, and one of the things that we can go to is Avixa just recently published the recommended practices for security and networked AV systems. I am not going to say that this is the most exhaustive thing out there, but it at least is an excellent starting point for people in the AV space to realize that, a function of my design is not just plugging an RJ45 into a network switch. A function of my design is understanding what are the threats that could be coming at this system, and how do I then mitigate the risks associated with those threats, or do I need to? Speaking to what Bradford was saying, with the end user he is now at, he's got a defined threat of there is something on the internet that is going to negatively impact my system. Thus, to mitigate the risk of that threat, I'm not connecting to the internet.
Yeah.
That's a valid security protocol. Okay. But we also, in our dialogue just now, agree or disagree. Well, if you change the frame of reference of the needs of the design, you're changing the threats and the risks associated, and you have to prioritize them differently.
Bill, you and I agree. Tim's wrong, but you and I agree. Now, and to Bill's point, I'm going to build on that a little bit. It comes down at the physical layer first. For instance, in my office building, if you come in, in every conference room, there are no unused Ethernet ports. Everyone is filled. And, the VoIP phone is plugged in. The board of choice, whether it be WebEx or Cisco Spark or whatever it is plugged in to the other one. So if I want to get on the network as an employee, I have my certificates, et cetera, gets me on the wireless. As a guest, they have to get onto the wireless first. And I have to give them a key and all the information. Is it perfect? No. Is it highly mitigating the risk? Yes, because someone can't just sit outside and go, oh, look, I have the Wi-Fi, or come into the room and plug in to that network jack and go, oh, look, I have everything. So it's still that physical layer. It's kind of like if you have to physically gain access to the device, the network security is not your problem. The physical security is your problem first. And that's where I think a certain amount of the sky is falling has been happening. But I also fully understand, as the person who wears tinfoil hats at AVNation, that the sky is falling and security is a huge problem. And there are multiple ways to mitigate it, but it's a choice as to how far you want to go. For a Fortune 100 company that's having conference rooms that are all connected via VPN throughout the internet, oh yeah, I'm updating all of those conference rooms all the time, making sure they're secure with the most recent updates. For a restaurant or retail space, that all I need to do is be able to switch between 4 inputs, between DJ and radio, jukebox and stuff like that. It doesn't need to be connected to the internet, and that is more secure. So it's, to Bill's point, it's mitigating where your risk is and what you're comfortable with. How big's the threat? What's your vulnerability? The vulnerability in the hotel that was hacked of not being able to control the temperature in your room or change the channel, that's a huge vulnerability to the hotel. The vulnerability for a restaurant to not be able to change channels on the TV, it's a big vulnerability, but it's not as huge of an issue.
Well, let me ask you this, and before we wrap up this conversation, Bill mentioned, I asked what manufacturers can do, and Bradford, I'll start with you, and then Bill, I want you to comment. Bill said the best way we can do this is to educate. Bill mentioned the fact that Avixa put out the paper on best practices. So I have in my head some obvious ones. You can get your CCNA. You're going to have your techs get your CCNA, your engineers or whatever. But what education is out there to at least get a baseline knowledge of what threat, risk, and vulnerability is, and how the consultants of an AV system, the engineers of an AV system, and the techs of these AV systems can put best practices, best IT practices in place? What education is out there available to them, Bradford?
So I read a lot of Spiceworks. I read and follow EFF. I follow some of the DEF CON stuff and some of the security pieces out there. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't know how to apply them, but I'm aware of them. And I know to talk about what's the impact, what's the risk. For instance, knowing that you have to physically get to the product, that changes my level of risk a huge amount. For other people, the fact that it's done via the internet, such as the problem with people being able to remotely control their former partners, spouses, business companies, et cetera, stuff through the internet, bigger risk, bigger issue. Different, don't need the physical access, still a threat. But now that's been documented, it's something I can think about. And I think that's the most important part to Bill's point. It's education and realizing security is the journey you're going to be on for the rest of your life. It's worse than being married, because when you're married, you make a mistake, sometimes you get forgiven. When you're in security and you make a mistake, there is no forgiveness because it's your job to solve it. That's why I become really friendly with the IT infrastructure guys. I read the stuff, I understand the concepts, and my first threat mitigation is always, why do I need to be connected to the internet? And that seems to be the thing that everyone forgets, especially with soft codecs becoming so popular, is you need to be connected to the internet for the conferencing system. No, you don't. I can do point-to-point with on-premises solution. I can run a Jabber server since it's open source on my property. I now no longer have to be on the internet. So some of these things are, to Bill's point, staying aware, know what's going on. Do not just believe the Facebook news and New York Times and Washington Post and Dallas Journal and Ladies Home Journal and all this. It's an amalgam of all the things put together, and you have to decide which sources you trust. But it is a definite journey of continuing education. It's just the same thing as anything else in IT, in AV, or AT as you called it last week. Remember when we used to do these XLR things and you had to solder them and you plugged them into the back of a console? That was great. We all knew that. We knew how to solve ground humps. Perfect, great. Then it all became digital. And now some of us have learned how to chase down clock syncs. But now you have to learn IT just to keep up with the AV portion. So now that AV is going more and more to IT centric, now you have to learn some of the IT practices to stay consistent. And none of this has to be, I have to spend 10 hours a week reading it. There's just a couple of articles out there that you can read. Like I said, I follow, like, for instance, Teresa Payton, and I forget the other young lady's name I follow, and a whole bunch of the EFF people on Twitter who have these updates and problems. And then I can read about them. And I look at Spiceworks. But I also always remember I get the value, I pay for them. So if I didn't pay anything for the news, guess how much it's worth?
None.
Exactly. So we need to start charging money, for my opinion.
I'll get right on that. All right, Mr. Natras, where can we get educated on this?
Well, it's very difficult to say, hey, here's the one-stop shop. Here's the encyclopedia of all of this. I think probably the better place to start here is realizing that audiovisual has a tendency to be, hey, it's good enough, or hey, it's functioning. And, an example of this is we walk into a room to commission that room. We plug in the laptop or computing device to the display. I see an image. Hey, we're good. And out the door we go. Not realizing that, there could be another manufacturer's computer walking into the room. There could be another operating system coming into the room. There could be EDID conflicts on an individual's computer. There's all these things that we know about that could be mistakes that would cause failure when the user comes in to use the room. That is a commissioning fault, but it is also an ongoing commissioning fault, because when I go in to service the room, should I not also be retesting to make sure everything is working right? Did I change something else? This is human nature. This is what processes and procedures can we put in place that when I go into first commission it, is everything working right? When I come into service it, is everything working right? Do I need to go through a procedure of bi-monthly or every other month going in and making sure everything's working right? And have I documented all of this? Now take that exact same concept and apply it to security.
And preach on, Brother Bill. With preach on this. I'm with you. Document it, have a procedure, all that good stuff.
So now, if you acknowledge through a risk or vulnerability assessment, if you acknowledge that there are certain things that you know could be negatively impacting the operation of your system, whether it's someone taking control of those devices or someone using those devices for inappropriate purposes, put those things into that checklist to go in and on a repetitive basis, make sure you're still safe. Okay. What are the, Bradford, you mentioned, the positive air gap concept. By the way, I love PAG because, I'm an audio guy. So PAG, NAG, it fits. But, positive air gap is a physical security solution. Don't plug in. If you can't plug in, you don't have a threat there, or a threat can be mitigated. But there's those other circumstances where we do need to be connected or interconnected. Bradford mentioned I can put things onto a service that interconnects these two things together, that I'm using a trusted service to do those connections because I've got servers on-prem and things like that. Yep. But if there's other devices on the network, and I don't even want to go into the IoT vulnerabilities discussion because that could be a 10-hour conversation. But if there are devices on that network that could have been, their operating systems might have been targeted and kernels could have been put in there, you have to do ongoing reviews to make certain that those things are still secure. And don't even talk about all the stuff that we put on our networks at home and the dangers there. I'll be honest, there was one of these recordings that I was on a couple years ago that I ended up falling off of the call because my son came home from school, kicked on his Xbox, and wiped out all the bandwidth on my network at home. Why? Well, it comes to find out he loaded some new stuff into that Xbox, and it was causing all kinds of bandwidth suck. So, did I know he put that stuff on the network? No. I found out the hard way he did. I got kicked off of a call. Thank God AVNation doesn't pay me much, so I didn't really lose anything in the process. But the point is that I have to be ever vigilant in continuing to watch what's going on my network resources. I have to have a checklist. I have to have a repetitive nature, and I have to have a documented procedure on what I'm doing to make sure that it's all going to be there. Now, is there any training to know how to do that? Not that I'm aware of.
I will say a VIX's commissioning list and testing list is a good start. It's like you said, just like the network security, in no way, shape, or form is it complete, and it will be a journey. But it gives you a first step of things to start looking at. But I also think as designers and as smart end users and as smart manufacturers, we should start saying, here are the things that you should consider. Here are the things you need to be aware of. Here are the things you should check. And yes, everyone's going to throw it out because we're all smarter than the information in the box. Every AV person is. But at least it's a start. It's like I sit down and, we talk about all the security stuff, all of the needs to be secure and keep data secure and all this. And then comes the other side of it, of if you lock down the security so tight, everyone has to find workarounds that are basically breaking your security because you haven't involved the actual use case of, I need to share a file. I need to be able to have a secure conference call, all this type of stuff. We all end up finding workarounds, and that's a bigger risk. And Bill, later on after this call, I'll explain to you about quality of service and port priority. My wife has learned about that with Netflix recently.
All right. Well, that'll be a different conversation. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us with us. Mr. Bill Natras, thank you. How people find you or BiAmp?
They can search me out at bill.natras on the Twitterverse, or they can do bill.natras@biamp.com if they're an email slave. So either of those. Or just search for my name on the internet and they can track me down.
I'm not sure what you'll find, so do it at your own risk. Also, with us, Bradford Ben, how do people find you, sir?
Well, if I'm not busy on the Twitter lampooning Tim Albright, you can find me at Bradford Ben on the Twitters, me at bradfordben.com, bradford.ben at AVNation. As I kind of joke, if you can't find me through the Google search, I don't want to talk with you. And some of those might be not suitable for work. Also, I do want to take a minute to thank our underwriters that make all of this possible, of which BIAMP is one, and they've been a very big supporter of ours. So I want to thank them for that. Also, I will warn you, stay away from Tim because currently his Bears are in last place. So he's already given up on them.
Even the season yet.
Are they in first place? Are they in last place?
They're in first place because the record is 0-0. So they are still in first.
They're tied for last.
They're tied for first.
They're tied for last.
When does hockey start?
It never ends in my world.
All right.
Go
Yeah.
Hawks.
Bill's got his nice Blackhawks. So Bradford took care of half of what I'm supposed to do here. The rest of it is, don't follow me, but go by the website, to which Bradford had an incredible hand in, AVNation.tv, AVNation.tv. While you're there, check out our other shows. We have 2 weeklies that take a look at the news of AV on a weekly basis. One is called AV Week, which we record every Friday, post every Monday, and Resi Week was at the residential side, post every Wednesday, hosted by Matt Scott. So all that, and yes, check out our underwriters, of which BIAMP is one. These are the folks that help us financially, help us go to stuff like New York Digital Signage Week. By the time this post, we will actually physically be at CEDIA, and next year we'll kick off everything with ISE 2019. So all that and more at avnation.tv, avnation.tv.